often amazed by the devotion that musicians practice as they spend countless hours in isolation honing their skills. This amazement only grows as I compare those many painstaking hours to the relatively small amount of time musicians actually spend on stage. I decided to ask the musicians whom I most admire and respect how they practice, what they practice, and about the role this training plays in their lives. This is the story of the true art of music making, the art of developing, honing, and maintaining a musical vocabulary. But first, I needed to conduct a survey of my fellow students at the University of Michigan School of Music, Theater, and Dance.
Four to 6 hours?
Maybe I can practice like 5 hours.
Anywhere from 1 to 4.
Usually I try to do like 4 or 5, maybe 6.
No, I just practice the piece I'm working on.
Yeah, I do a lot of tonal work, long tones and scales and intervals and stuff like that. Just like foundation stuff.
I try to do something to warm myself up and do some kind of like technique building. It's not always the same, but pretty similar. Scales, arpeggios.
I usually start with like thirds, sixths, and just to like get the intervals in my ear and like loosen up my fingers.
I do like practicing. If I'm really not enjoying myself, I usually stop. So if I'm practicing, I'm probably having a good time.
I like, but not too much. I just like practice 30 minutes and I need to rest and practice again.
Parts of it, there's some parts that are just tedious, like the technical stuff you need to just do.
Yeah.
But when you're, sometimes you get into it and you really enjoy it.
Generally, yeah. I don't really necessarily go into it really wanting to practice, but once you get into it, you have good. Usually they're good practice sessions.
Yeah. A good place to start seemed to be one of my close friends, who is also one of my teachers and a percussionist who performs on an extremely high level. Not only that, but he has very strong feelings about how we approach our practice time and the ways in which our practice habits impact our performances.
I certainly try to practice every day, at least something a little bit. In the best case scenario, when I can be super disciplined about it, I do have a routine that I try to follow that sort of serves one of two purposes. It's partly maintenance, just keeping the hands in shape and keeping things moving well, that hopefully will then apply to everything else that I'm doing. And then there's also part of that routine that I try to use as a bit of a workout to keep kind of pushing the boundaries of speed and stamina and those kinds of things. So that routine, if I did anything every day, it would be that routine, which is sort of a little snare drum routine, and in its totality takes probably about an hour. I've done sort of shorter and more compact versions of that. Then supplement to that would be if I'm preparing a new piece for a recital, I'm working on some new rep, then that would kind of be tagged on to that basic routine in a daily sort of practice situation. So I think that one of the challenges in playing percussion specifically is whether it's in a high school or in this case a university setting with majors, we're trying to get good at a variety of instruments that are sort of all on these separate islands. There's marimba, there's timpani, there's drum set if you want, and snare drum. And I think the challenge for a lot of students is how do you get any sort of professional level skills on all of those things. So what I tried to figure out is on all of those instruments, what are some of the things that they share, at least technically speaking, in terms of the mechanics of what I'm doing. And if I can make a list of those things and sort of work on that set of material every day, I'm in essence practicing all those instruments even if I don't actually stand behind them by virtue of doing this material that is found in all of those areas. So that's kind of where this sort of 1 hour workout started to develop. I don't practice with a metronome really at all unless I'm learning a piece where I need to use a metronome. I try to do everything with tunes. So I put a playlist together that's got a bunch of pop tunes that I like. So you put your, you know, your Britney Spears and your whatever you're into, and then you play along with that. So by the time you get done listening to the tune, you know, 5 minutes has passed, and all right, cool, I've been doing this, and now my hands feel great. If you put on a metronome and you sat there and did that for 5 minutes, it would feel like 5 years, and chances are you wouldn't do that. So I do that. In terms of really streamlining and mastering the process of practicing, there's a lot of components to that. Certainly there's the physical component of what am I doing to learn and retain and memorize, but there's also the emotional component of making practicing not this frustrating, horrible chore, because it isn't if you don't want it to be. And I think it is for a lot of people, unfortunately, you know? So.
Another musician whom I've always admired is the jazz pianist Matt Endall, who I met while we were both students in the jazz department at the University of Michigan. His approach to practicing is largely derived from the creative demands he faces as an improviser, rather than the cold repetition necessary for flawless execution of a pre-composed work.
I'm always sort of tweaking my routine. I tend to begin by playing a song that I've been listening to a lot, or playing through some ideas that I've had, and along the way, if I run into any sort of technical snares, then I'll turn that technical snare into an exercise on the spot. So try to work through it in all the different keys, and or whatever needs to be done to make sure that I get more comfortable with it, to sort of smooth it out. The way that I've come to understand my musical personality, it definitely tends more toward sort of a much more improvisational approach to practice, in which it's I would argue that it's no less disciplined, but it certainly is a little less orthodox. It's not particularly structured, like today I'm going to work on these scales for this amount of time. It's much more practical based. Technique often maybe suffers is the wrong word, but my technique often gets kind of slightly sidelined in the process. But I don't think that music is about technique as much as it is about creativity. For myself personally, I'd rather be fluently creative than a technical whiz kid. You know, that's kind of where I've stood my whole life so far.
Yeah. Another jazz musician who I have had the great fortune of working with is the saxophonist Dan Bennett. I have always known Dan to be devoted to his practice time, and in my experience he is the kind of musician who is constantly pushing the people with whom he plays. I asked him about his practice sessions and how he has developed such a powerful and distinctive voice.
The content of my practice changes kind of at a slow rate of speed and like almost like yearly cycles in terms of what I'm focusing on, which probably has a lot to do with like what kind of music I'm playing. So, you know, several years ago, so I had a much like smaller list of things I had to do to be like a working musician then. And so most of my practice time was focused on like creative practicing or improvising, long, you know, kind of sections of improvising, and then a short reassessment of things I didn't get to and couldn't play and wanted to play and needed to work on. And
like things you couldn't access.
Yeah, things I couldn't access, and then I'd go back, and whether that was like harmonic or technical, a lot of times it's both, you know, or whether it had to do with sound production and stuff like that, and kind of try to tackle those or do something in the direction of tackling those. I hate feeling unprepared to play, and for me now, usually that means not knowing songs. Now, the gigs I have are much more varied, and so my practice is like, for the past couple years, it's been a lot more like work-oriented, learning like jazz repertoire or learning songs off of a CD that someone's given me that I need to play at a recording or at a gig. Whether you're practicing or not, you should get on the stage as if you hadn't just been working something out, you know. Which I think is the biggest thing.
Yeah.
I mean, because that stuff becomes like like a reflex, you know. For me, as soon as I'm nervous, like shitty 16th note, you know, slurry of stuff that I don't even know where it comes from anymore. I mean, that's been my personal struggle as a musician, especially lately, has been to like not do that. And I still do it every time I play, but I'm still thinking about not doing that. Trying not to play a single note, you know, that's thoughtless or whatever, you know. And
Amy Porter, renowned flutist and professor of flute at the University of Michigan, has made her practicing regiment an integral part of her own development, but she has also made it an aspect of her professional reputation. In her instructional DVD, The Anatomy of Sound, she lays out in extreme detail the elements of her 4-hour practice routine.
Welcome to my warm-up. This is usually how I begin my practice sessions, with just long tones, analyzing the airspeed. And when it runs out, I take a big, luxurious, long breath, and I just listen. There might be air bursts. The air might go flat or sharp. I just stand there and I blow.
I don't do the 4-hour routine
Anymore, right?
No. It was something I devised for students because it was the best lesson in the world when a student said to me, "You don't teach like my old teacher taught." And she's like, you know, her teacher sang all the rhythms, her teacher didn't, you know, care. And so I said, well, look, you have to spend 30 minutes on this, 20 minutes on that, and take a 10-minute break. So everything is 15 minutes and a 10-minute break. My practice routine is not built in at all. It's kind of like my life has to happen first, and then my practicing happens around it, because at this point, I need to get stuff done. And if I take care of myself first, everything else will fall into place. I discovered that when I became a professor. It's kind of per project I have to practice now. Now, back when I was 9 to about 34, it was definitely 4 to 5 hours, Taffenel Gobert. That's what, when you said, hey, is that an etude book? No, it's our Bible of technique. Just much like Arbin, your trumpet. I learned how not to practice, which is an hour and a half of Taffenel Gobert, and by the time you know it, you are bent over and you have no neck and you are hurting.
Yeah.
And I've seen in teaching tendonitis start to happen, and there's too much scale work, too much combined. It's a wrong cocktail if you mix the too much technique with the etudes of, say, Burbagay. They're all the same, and the student comes in saying, ow. So you must stop, you know, and give them small doses.
I first met Naval Singh when I was studying North Indian classical music in Varanasi, India. He is now visiting the United States as a student of Western music, but I asked him to talk about the Indian approach to daily practice, known as riyaz.
Basically, Riyaz is the Urdu word, and it means exercise, and it is used for maybe wrestling. It is used for meditation. It is used for music practice also. Uh, so actually, Riyaz is not just about getting a strength in your hand or your fingers or your body, but it is also you get a strength internally, a kind of this is a psychological thing that actually my Dada Guruji's, it means my teacher's teacher, used to say that he is going to do a kind of worship or prayer or sadhana, kind of meditation. So if you will not practice, if you will live one like a single day or a certain time that you usually practice in the morning, you will start to feel like, oh, there is something missing, and it is not just about your your body things, but it is actually internal kind of a strength that you start to feel like, oh, it's something is missing, and you will feel, maybe you start to feel like a psychological weakness. As an Indian musician, we always think playing music is part of prayer. It's a part of offering something to God. So if you think about your riyaz as part of your morning prayer or evening prayer or something like that, you will not try to achieve something. Actually, something will that achievement will come automatically if you will just sit down, or you will just think about the naad, that is sound, and rhythm, that is lay. That is actually, then you will never get bored or frustrated or something like that. Again, it is not like you are trying to achieve something. That is not about achievement. It's just about your how much you are devoted and dedicated to your music or your musical god.